Welcome. You are listening to audio from the table. If you'd like to learn more about our community or donate to this ministry, please visit thetabletx.com.
Grace and Peace Table Podcast listeners, Brett here. So good to be with you all. So we are in the sixth Sunday of Eastertide, and of our series titled Eastertide, This Is Not the End, where we're just reminding ourselves that Easter is not a one-day event. Resurrection's not some sort of finish line at which we all say, oh, hooray for Jesus, and then go back to our lives as usual. Rather, this season of Easter, we're all invited to the more that God has for us, the resurrection life and joy and peace that Christ has for us. So that's really what this series is about. So the title of my message specific to this week is Drawn. Our text is from John chapter 14, verses 15 through 19, which says, "If you love me, keep my commands, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him, because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live." So that's a very kind of mystical, mysterious, beautiful passage. And for the sake of clarity in this message, what I want to do is just focus in on one verse, and it's verse 15, the opening line, which simply says, "If you love me, keep my commands." If you love me, keep my commands. Now, I think this begs a few questions. First would probably be, which commands is Jesus referring to? And because he doesn't launch into 20 verses outlining the specific commands he has in mind, my hunch is he's referring to the many teachings he gave about how to live in right relationship with God and others. One good summary, there's many, you'd have to really read all the Gospels to know, but or to kind of get a feel for all of them. But a good summary could be from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And, it's things these probably won't shock you if you're at all familiar with the teachings of Christ. It's things like don't hate your brother or sister, seek reconciliation with people, don't lust, don't retaliate with vengeance in your heart, love your enemies, give to the needy, pray, fast, don't be anxious, don't judge, right? In essence, I think if you're familiar with the Gospels and have been in the church for any length of time, you have kind of a feel for roughly, I know what Jesus wants me to do. However, this kind of brings us to question number 2. So if Jesus says, keep my commands, it's interesting that both for us, here in our church, I wouldn't want to exclude us, but also the broader church. I'll just talk about the American church. Statements of love for Jesus so easily flow from our mouths. You ask someone, hey, do you love Jesus? And oh, of course I love Jesus. Just love the Lord. However, it's interesting that we have such a crisis of keeping. In other words, the second question which comes to mind is, why do we not obey? We say we love the Lord, but then we just are I don't know, at times we even just flat out ignore Christ. We're we don't have to do that, It's a strange thing. I think in ways there's probably echoes here of Romans 7, which Mindy quoted last week during our time of sacred music and worship. She read part of Romans 7 where Paul describes how the very good he wants to do, that's what he doesn't do, and then all the evil things he's I gotta avoid that. That's what he finds himself doing over and over and over again. So you can probably relate to this. But I think it's interesting that I think you'll agree the world would be a lot better if the church would keep the commands of Jesus. And heck, my own life, my my own, family and friendship circle and broader community and, the ripple effects of how I live, it like ripples out to others. So I'd agree even on a personal level, like things would be a lot better in my sphere if I would faithfully keep the commands of Jesus. So what do we do? Well, if I were to have preached this sermon back in my youth pastor days, which ended about 15 years ago, where I would have gone from this point is basically to double down, nay, triple down on the notion of obedience, on the keeping. So I probably would have said something like this. Look, church, we say we love God, but we don't keep God's commandments. We're hypocrites and liars, and it's got to stop. Like it's got to stop. We must do better. You say, I am trying. No, try harder. Try harder. Double down on your efforts. Triple down. Strive to obey. Long to obey. Push yourself to obey. And what will you find? Love will follow that. Love will follow that. So that's the way I would have framed this and preached it 15 years ago. Of course, I would have stretched it out to 30 minutes, but that's it. That's it in a paragraph. Preachers are good at that. Okay, so how would I do it now? Well, one of the great souls, the great teachers in the Christian tradition in the last, I'd say 100 years or so, he was just incredible, was a man named Dallas Willard. He, God rest his soul, he passed away just a few years back. But he pointed out when he was reflecting on this passage specifically, he said, it's interesting that the way we often interpret this text is basically like what I just did above, or previously. It's almost like the way human beings will sometimes manipulate one another with this kind of conditional love statement. If you love me, then you'll, fill in the blank. Buy me nice things. You ever said something like that to someone or had someone to do that to you? It feels a little strange. Imagine how my kids would feel if I said, hey, remember, kiddo, if you love me, you'll knock this STAR test out of the park. Make sure you get straight A's. Or, if they said to me, hey, Dad, if you love me, if you really love me, Dad, you'll buy me those new shoes I want, right? You could see this wouldn't necessarily be a recipe for healthy relating, because it's this kind of conditional love, prove to me your love, prove it. Oh, I don't believe you. So what Willard does, following folks like the church father St. Augustine, who taught a lot about desire and such, we'll get more into that momentarily. What he did is he actually reversed the interpretation of that passage. And I completely resonate with what he does here. He basically asks this question. He says, what if the answer is not triple down on the commands and the love will follow, but actually, what if it's the opposite? The way he sums it up, he says, what if the source of the keeping is the loving? He goes on to name that it's a renovated heart of love for Christ, for God, that actually puts us in the place where keeping the commandments is like the natural thing to do. The way he puts it, he says, keeping Jesus' commandments is either easy or impossible. That's a great way to think of it. Like it's either easy or impossible. In other words, what's the difference between easy and impossible? Well, the difference is the love, right? The source of the keeping is the loving. To kind of put this in my own words, I might say that it's true that the church has a crisis of obedience to the teachings of Jesus. And let's make it more personal. Heck, it's true that in my own life, there's like a crisis of obedience to the teachings of Jesus. However, the answer is not greater striving, white knuckling, but greater loving. Because, see, demands for obedience, it's a form of forcing. Threats push us. Fear drives us. But it can only get you so far. Ultimately, it's love that takes us all the way home. It's love that draws us. It's desire for God that calls us, and suddenly we find that one by one, keeping the commandments is falling into place in our lives. There's a marvelous quote. I think I've mentioned this before, maybe a good year or two ago in a message, but it's from the French writer Antoine, I had to look this up on YouTube, du Saint-Exupéry. That's, my French is a tragedy. Antoine du Saint-Exupéry. And he put it this way. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. Oh, that is so insightful. And now, of course, it's poetic, so I don't think Exupéry's point is to utterly disparage the role of tasks and to-dos. Like, okay, obviously in this life, organization, that's just going to be a part of it. But the deeper truth that he's making, I think it's exactly right. In our heart of hearts, human beings are just set on fire in the best of ways by love. We are drawn by what we desire. We long for things. We're called towards visions. We're pulled forward by dreams of what we imagine it would look like to flourish. So kind of translating this back into John 14, verse 15, translating this into Christian discipleship, we might say it like this. If you want people to keep Jesus' commands, don't guilt trip them about their many sins. Don't scare them with threats of hell. Don't force them into more church attendance, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the God who is love. Because, church, we move toward what we love. From this vantage point, I think this really opens our minds up to begin to understand what following Jesus is all about and to see in fresh new ways what Christian discipleship is about. Like, can you see the difference between kind of a certain conversion to Christianity, like where intellectually we are convinced of certain theological truths, and the difference between something like that, or maybe that would be like a starting point, but then the deeper process of becoming an actual disciple of Jesus? Like, can you see what that's all about? It's like, you might say that this whole question of desire and love and longing, like this is the deeper conversion. It's very important to believe things, and the intellect, the mind, has absolutely its place. But it's interesting that Christ's Great Commission to the church was not, go ye therefore and make converts. It was, go and make disciples. And discipleship, seen through this lens, you can see that it's really a question of what has captured your heart. What do you long for? What do you love? What vision of the good life are you chasing? That's your God. That's your religion. And so we might say that intentional discipleship to Jesus is curated desire. It's selective, it's ordered desire. In other words, it's learning to say like no to lesser desires, but not because you're like, I just hate myself and want to be miserable, but I'll love God in the end, No, but it's because you're actually focused on the greater desire. Like, can you see how outwardly this person who's learned to long for the endless immensity of the God who is love, who's gotten a taste of God, an experience of God, and is on that spiritual path, growing in spiritual intelligence and emotional intelligence, and like this, their inner life and their soul is being healed and transformed. Can you see how outwardly that person might actually look incredibly disciplined and rigorous and obedient, but actually what's going on? It's simply that they've allowed that orientation towards God to order and set right, and in cases peel away lesser desires. Another way this kind of opens up is to see in ways all of life as discipleship, not necessarily discipleship to Jesus, but kind of everything is trying to shape our desires. I mean, advertisers, oh, come on. They know this stuff, don't they? I mean, every commercial, maybe not every, but so many commercials, they at times will use fear and manipulation and things like that. Like, they'll do that. But I think, advertisers have learned about this desire thing. And so they're constantly trying to capture our hearts with visions of, what the good life is. And of course, it involves buying their product for only, $19.99 plus tax. Oh my gosh. It's like everything's a dream and a vision and a vision of flourishing. And, like I'm thinking of, I'm very selective about what I let my kids watch on YouTube. At times I've been inches away from just eliminating the YouTubes entirely from their life, because so much of the stuff, especially what's aimed towards children and even teens, is, it's just discipleship into the religion of consumerism and materialism. It's just like, it's totally teaching them to long for things as though that's going to be the trick. I just hate these videos. My boys, I immediately have them turned off when it's like some guy who's like usually like about 21 years old and he's all, acting super hyped up and happy, and he's like, hey, watch me as I spend my day driving around the Bay Area in my rented Lamborghini. Woo! My boys, like, I laugh at it. I'm like, that is so shallow and stupid. But hey, 11 and 8-year-old boys, they're like, oh, babies. That's a vision of the good life. What's happening there? That's discipleship. Their desire. It's being shaped and formed. It's being curated. And they might even become quite disciplined little fellows, or maybe as they become older fellows, as they start to chase that vision of the good life. An author who I've quoted before around these kinds of themes, he's just written so eloquently about all of this. And he also drew heavily on St. Augustine for inspiration, is the Reformed theologian James K. Smith. And I found that quote above about shipbuilding from his book, You Are What You Love. And Smith also said this: we aren't really motivated by abstract ideas or pushed by rules and duties. Instead, some panoramic tableau, that means like a vision, a story, of what looks like flourishing has an alluring power that attracts. Can you hear echoes there of John 14:15? Right? The way Smith puts it is, we aren't really pushed by demands for obedience. We're drawn by desire, drawn by what we love. If you want to keep the commands, grow in love. As Willard put it, the source of the keeping is the loving. This is why I say the deeper Christian conversion is less about intellect, less about like, hey, get all your theological ducks in a row and make sure you believe all the perfect things, and AKA things that I believe about Jesus and such. That I do think theology matters and thinking matters, but it's like there's deeper things though. Ultimately, I want to know what you love. Church, what do you love? What are you aiming your life towards? Because ultimately, we might say that the crisis of obedience in the church is really less about discipline. Like, oh, if only we were more rigorous and disciplined, we would then, things would really click into place. I actually, as I look across the church, we have quite disciplined people by and large. People like get up early, and many of them even like work out, and, we go to work for like 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And, it's a disciplined thing, right? We have discipline, but I wonder if, what we might ask is, why don't we obey Christ? Why aren't we doing that? And I think it's because our hearts have been captured by some other vision of what looks like flourishing. In essence, we are disciples. But, because to be human is to be a disciple of someone. We just necessarily aren't like Christian disciples. I don't say that in a shaming way. Like, you think you're a Christian, but you're not at all. I mean, this is going for me too, right? In essence, we've got to take a really hard look at where is my time and energy and resources and imagination and my dreams for the future? Like, what are those? And what am I pouring my life and my soul into? What are those visions? And, the truth is they're as diverse as people listening to this podcast right now. I mean, in American culture, they often become very kind of consumeristic, materialistic. Sometimes it's like a certain vision of retirement. Like, one day I'm going to have like 2 million in the bank and I'm going to have a red BMW in the driveway. And that's the good life. And we will be incredibly disciplined in our pursuit of that. But can you see where that rigor and that desire just might come very much at the cost of a cultivation of our own heart and mind and soul? I mean, as the way Jesus put it was, man, what good is it if you gain the whole world? In other words, all the worldly goods and success and people's approval and acclaim, and yet you lose your own soul. And I think that's more than just you go to the bad place instead of the good place. I mean, you lose your peace, you lose your joy, you lose your love. Like, what? Do not make that trade. No. So, we could go on and on with examples, and for some, it's like a certain neighborhood, of like, my whole life I'm pointed towards getting into that place, that house in that neighborhood, and that's like my whole dream. And I drive through, when I'm doing my side gig each week, I drive off of Exchange in Allen, and there's a sign. There's some beautiful neighborhoods and homes out there in West Allen, and this big sign, it's like has this couple, they look deliriously happy as they're just gazing at their home in this kind of marketing big, advertisement. And the only caption, the only words on the advertisement, it just says, "You've earned it." Right? It's like, for some people, that's their vision of the good life, and they are sold out for it. And, am I saying, like, if you own a home, that's bad? No, but I'm saying we've got to search our hearts. We've got to search what's our vision of the good life. So this, I guess, begs the question, what is the Christian vision of flourishing? What does it actually mean to grow in love for Jesus Christ, for the God who is Father, Son, Spirit, so that obedience follows? Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like? I would, in ways, refer you to everything we've been talking about in this Eastertide series. It's been 6 weeks now. This is week 6 on all of these themes. And you see, the Christian vision of flourishing, it's not like becoming a Bible scholar or something, though if you want to be a Bible scholar, that's great. But the Christian vision of flourishing is really about your heart. And you might say that's nothing less than union, deepest connection with the God who is love. Like, it is joy and bliss and peace. That's what Christian faith is all about. That's even what following Jesus is all about. It's deeper than even like ethics or like obeying. Again, the source of the obeying, of the keeping, is actually the loving. I love this quote from St. Augustine. He said, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you." See, this is why I think the religion of American consumerism just falls utterly flat, does not satisfy, because if anything, it just cultivates more and more of a restless heart. We're just hungry people for the next thing, the next experience, the next purchase, the next, and it's just, we're restless. There's no peace in it. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. We long for nothing less than union with the God who is love. So I'll close with this quote. I want to give you kind of a practical, kind of a vision of someone who pursued this and what it looks like and sounds like. This is from a documentary titled Brotherhood, The Inner Life of Monks, and it's from Brother Liam Strahan. Right towards the end of his life, he said this: "I've been 60 years or more in a monastery. In the early days, my prayer was something that we did. Now, I don't pray. Prayer is the atmosphere in which I live. My whole life is just a prayer to God. He continues, do you understand? I don't say prayers. The presence of God is something that I'm aware of all the time. I'm just living in the presence of God. That's my prayer. And friends, that's a vision of Christian flourishing. And my hunch is that Brother Liam Strahan kept the commands. Not because he was like the most disciplined person you've ever seen, but because when we pursue that kind of love and union, the keeping of the commandments is bound to follow. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.